My name is Sarah Grace Carter, and what I'm about to share with you is unlike anything I could have imagined. It all began on an ordinary evening as I drove home after a long shift at the hospital. I had no warning that my life was about to change forever. Suddenly, a horrific accident left me critically injured, and for 27 minutes, I was clinically dead. But during those moments, I experienced something extraordinary. I was taken to a realm of indescribable light and peace, where I stood in the presence of Jesus himself. There, he revealed a truth that has transformed my life forever. He showed me what actually happens in heaven when you pray, its ability to shatter darkness, and the way its effects reach across generations and transform lives. What I saw and heard has stayed with me ever since, and I have made it my life mission to share this story to as many people as possible. If you'll allow me, I'd like to share a bit more context. I'm a 36-year-old pediatric nurse from Dallas, Texas. From the outside, my life seemed perfect. A career dedicated to helping sick children, a loving husband, and a close-knit circle of friends. But beneath the surface, I carried doubts that quietly chipped away at my faith. Raised in a Christian home, prayer had always been a part of my life. As a little girl, I prayed with wide-eyed trust, believing that every word was heard. But as the years went on, unanswered prayers began to plant seeds of skepticism in my heart. I'd seen so much suffering in my career, parents begging God for their children to be healed, only to watch those same children slip away. It felt like no matter how much I prayed, the outcomes never changed. Does it even matter? I would wonder, as I whispered prayers between administering medications or holding the hand of a frightened child. I started praying less, convincing myself that my actions spoke louder than my words. On January 12, 2025, I was exhausted after a 16-hour shift. Rain poured relentlessly as I drove home, my mind clouded with the faces of the children I couldn't save. I didn't pray that night. I hadn't prayed in days. Little did I know that in just a few moments, my life and my understanding of prayer would change forever. The rain poured down in heavy sheets that night, my windshield wipers working overtime as I navigated the slick Dallas streets. My body was drained from back-to-back shifts, and my mind swirled with thoughts of patients I couldn't save and the endless to-do list waiting for me at home. I just wanted to get there, crawl into bed, and let the world fade away for a few hours. The intersection of Elm and Preston was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic thrum of the rain. The light turned green and I moved forward, barely noticing the faint glow of headlights barreling toward me from the side. The crash was sudden, a deafening collision of metal and glass. My car spun out of control before slamming into a concrete barrier. Everything felt distant, sounds muffled, my body numb. I was trapped, pinned under the crumpled dashboard as rain seeped through shattered windows. In those moments, time seemed to stretch and blur. Then the darkness came, creeping in at the edges of my vision until it swallowed everything whole. I was later told that paramedics arrived within minutes, fighting to free me from the wreckage. My heart had stopped before I even reached the hospital, and I was declared clinically dead at 10:47 p.m. For 27 minutes I was gone. No pulse, no breath. Yet, in that void, something extraordinary happened. What felt like the end was only the beginning of a journey that would forever transform my life. The darkness was absolute, yet it didn't feel oppressive. It was a quiet stillness, like the moments before dawn. Suddenly, light began to pierce the void, faint at first, then growing in brilliance. This was no ordinary light. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but alive, radiating warmth and peace that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. As it enveloped me, every fear, every ache, every shred of doubt melted away. I had never felt so whole, so complete. When I opened my eyes, or what felt like opening them, I was standing in a realm beyond anything my mind could comprehend. The air shimmered with colors I had never seen before, hues so vibrant they seemed to sing. The ground beneath me wasn't solid in the earthly sense, but felt firm and alive under my feet, softly glowing with a golden light. All around me was harmony, a beauty so profound it felt as though the entire realm was breathing with life itself. Then I felt it, a presence. I turned, and there he was. Jesus stood before me, and the sight of him took my breath away. His presence was overwhelming, yet deeply comforting, like encountering both a mighty king and a loving father at once. He radiated light, not just around him, but from within, a light that spoke of boundless love and infinite authority. His face was familiar, yet beyond description, holding a kindness and strength that pierced straight to my soul. His eyes, they were unlike anything I had ever seen. Eternity itself seemed to reside in them. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with love and power. Just hearing him speak my name sent a wave of peace through me. It wasn't just a name. It was as if he spoke to the very essence of who I was, affirming every part of me. In that one word, he conveyed a love so profound, it left me trembling. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face, unable to do anything else in the presence of such majesty. "Lord," I whispered, my voice breaking, "why am I here?" He knelt down and gently lifted my chin. His touch, so tender, it filled me with a sense of belonging I had never known. "Sarah," he said again, "I've brought you here to show you the truth about prayer. What you are about to see will reveal its eternal impact and change the way you understand its power." His words were both humbling and electrifying. My heart swelled with a mixture of awe and anticipation. I wanted to ask questions, to pour out every doubt and fear I had carried, but no words came. Yet I knew it didn't matter. He already knew everything in my heart. Standing in his presence, I felt fully known and fully loved. There was no condemnation, no judgment, only an infinite patience and compassion that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. It was as though every moment of my life, every triumph, every failure, every doubt was laid bare before him. And still, his love for me was unshakable. As I gazed at him, the peace and love that radiated from him filled every corner of my being. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly at home, not a place, but in his presence. And that was it. He had called me by name, brought me into his presence, and promised to show me a truth I had never fully grasped. The journey had just begun. The world around us began to shift, the radiant light of the heavenly realm softening as new images started to form. I found myself standing in a space unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't heaven, but a place where light and shadow intermingled, a space between realms. The atmosphere here was alive with movement, a silent hum that spoke of conflict and purpose. Though I couldn't fully comprehend it, I knew I was about to see what happens beyond the veil of the physical world. "Sarah," Jesus said, his voice steady and filled with compassion, "now I will show you what happens when my children pray." As he spoke, images from my life began to appear before us, suspended like living memories. The first image was of me as a little girl kneeling beside my bed, clasping my hands tightly together. I remembered this moment. It was the night I prayed for my sick cat, Muffin. At the time, it had felt like the simplest, smallest prayer, and yet here I was, watching it unfold in a way I never imagined. The words of my prayer seemed to rise like streams of light, glowing brighter as they ascended into the heavens. The light traveled upward with purpose and power, piercing through layers of shadow that I hadn't known existed. In the spiritual realm, I could see dark, shadowy figures recoiling as the prayer's light scattered them, breaking their grip on that moment in time. It wasn't just a prayer for a pet, it was an act of faith, a spark that had real impact in the unseen world. Jesus turned to me, his gaze full of love. Even the smallest prayer, Sarah, carries great power. You cannot see the full extent of its reach, but every word spoken in faith resonates throughout eternity. The scene shifted, and I saw a different moment from my life. I was in my early 20s, sitting in my car after a long shift at the hospital. Tears streamed down my face as I prayed for a patient who had just passed away. "Lord," I had whispered through sobs, "please comfort his family. Let them feel your presence." At the time, I had felt so helpless, doubting whether my prayer had even reached God, but now I saw the truth. As those simple, broken words left my lips, they became beams of light, surging into the spiritual realm with a force that startled me. The light cut through a dense fog of shadow that surrounded the grieving family, scattering the darkness. I watched as angels descended, their presence bright and commanding, bringing peace and comfort to the family in a way I could never have imagined. I stood in awe, my heart pounding, as the weight of what I was seeing began to settle in. "Even that prayer mattered?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jesus nodded, his expression full of understanding. "Every prayer matters, Sarah. No matter how small or uncertain it may feel, when it is offered in faith, it changes everything." More scenes appeared, each one showing moments I had thought were insignificant. A hurried prayer before bed, a quick plea for strength during a busy shift, a whispered blessing over a meal. Every single one sent ripples of light into the spiritual realm, breaking through shadows and inspiring angelic action. I saw how my prayers had dismantled barriers I didn't know existed, how they had brought hope, healing, and peace into situations where I had felt powerless. But I also saw something else: the enemy's tactics to stop me. In several moments, I watched as dark, shadowy figures worked tirelessly to distract me from praying. They whispered lies like, "It doesn't matter. You're too tired. Nothing will change." I saw how these shadows created chaos in my mind, stirring exhaustion, doubt, and even resentment to keep me from connecting with God. "Do you see, Sarah?" Jesus asked gently. "The enemy fears prayer because it disrupts his plans. That is why he works so hard to keep my children from praying." Tears streamed down my face as I watched this battle play out, a battle I had been unaware of for most of my life. For every prayer I had chosen to pray, there were moments where I had been too distracted or discouraged to speak even a word. Yet, even in those moments, I could see Jesus waiting patiently, his love for me unwavering. He turned to me, his voice filled with compassion and urgency. "Prayer is not just words spoken into the air, Sarah. It is a force that moves heaven and earth. When my children pray, all of heaven responds." I stood there, overwhelmed by what I was witnessing. Every prayer, no matter how small, carried the weight of heaven's power. Every prayer shattered darkness, strengthened angels, and brought light into the world. And now I understood the truth. Prayer wasn't just something I should do. It was a gift, a weapon, and a connection to God that changed everything. At that moment, I knew my understanding of prayer would never be the same. The world around me shifted again, and I found myself in what felt like a spiritual battlefield. It wasn't chaotic or loud, it was eerie and calculated. I stood in a space where light and shadow wove together, the boundaries of heaven and earth colliding in a realm I had never imagined. The air carried a tension that felt both overwhelming and profound. as though it were alive with unseen forces at work. "Sarah," Jesus said, his voice steady and full of authority, "this is what happens around you every day, whether you see it or not." He gestured, and suddenly I saw myself in the mundane moments of life, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling on my phone, rushing to get out the door, or collapsing onto the couch after a long day at the hospital. In these seemingly ordinary instances, shadowy figures moved around me, unseen but present. They whispered lies. "You're too tired to pray. It doesn't matter. Nothing will change." Their voices were subtle, persistent, and perfectly timed to make me believe those thoughts were my own. In one scene, I watched myself sitting in my car, exhausted after a shift. My Bible sat in the passenger seat, untouched. The shadows grew thicker as I hesitated, debating whether to spend a moment in prayer. Their whispers grew louder. "You've worked so hard already. Rest. It's not important." Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched myself give in to the whispers, driving home in silence. I could see the effect in the spiritual realm. The darkness remained, thick and unchallenged, settling like a fog around me. It wasn't an attack in the way I had imagined spiritual warfare. It was subtle and insidious, relying on my inaction to grow stronger. But then, Jesus pointed to a different scene. I saw myself on a different day, sitting on the same couch, my phone buzzing with distractions. This time, however, I chose differently. I closed my eyes and whispered a short, tired prayer. "Lord, I don't have the strength, but please be with me." The moment those words left my lips, light erupted into the spiritual realm. It wasn't a flicker or a faint glow. It was a powerful burst that shattered the darkness around me. The shadowy figures scattered, recoiling in terror as angels descended, their presence bright and commanding. They surrounded me, their movements swift and deliberate, dismantling strongholds that had begun to form around my mind and heart. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with love and understanding. "This is why the enemy fears prayer, Sarah. Even the smallest prayer spoken in faith destroys his plans. He knows the power of prayer, even when you do not." I watched as the shadows regrouped, whispering frantically among themselves. "Distract her," one hissed. "Make her think she's too busy. Make her believe it doesn't matter." I saw how they strategized to keep me and so many others from praying. Their methods weren't always grand or obvious. They relied on subtle diversions using exhaustion, doubts, and even seemingly good things to keep me from connecting with God. Yet every time I pushed through and prayed, even when it felt like nothing was happening, I saw the truth. Light always overcame darkness. Prayer always had an impact, even if I couldn't see it in the moment. In another scene, I saw myself praying for one of my patients, a little girl named Lucy who had been battling a serious illness. At the time, I had felt powerless, my words barely audible as I asked God to heal her. In the spiritual realm, however, those words became a weapon. They struck against the darkness surrounding her hospital room, weakening its hold. Angels moved into action, creating a shield of light around Lucy and her family. I realized that even though I hadn't seen immediate results, the battle was still being fought, and the prayer was making a difference. Jesus gestured again, and I saw another truth: prayers that went unspoken. Moments when I had felt a nudge to pray but dismissed it as unimportant or thought I'd do it later. These moments hung in the spiritual realm like empty spaces, gaps where light could have been, but wasn't. Yet even in these missed moments, Jesus' patience was unwavering. I saw him standing nearby, waiting for me to turn to him, his love constant, and his invitation always open. "The enemy fears the prayer that hasn't been prayed yet," Jesus said. "That's why he works so hard to stop it. He knows the power it holds." His words resonated deeply, and my heart felt heavy with the realization of how often I had let distractions win. But at the same time, I felt an incredible sense of hope. I could see now that every prayer mattered, no matter how small or imperfect. It wasn't about the length or eloquence. It was about faith and the connection it created with God. As the scenes faded, Jesus turned to me, his expression both gentle and firm. "Sarah, you must understand this truth. Prayer is not a passive act. It is a battle cry, a weapon that dismantles the plans of darkness and calls forth the power of heaven. Never doubt its impact." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The reality of what I had witnessed was overwhelming, but I felt a renewed strength within me. Prayer wasn't just a discipline. It was a lifeline, a force that moved heaven and earth, and a way to fight battles I couldn't see. I knew my understanding of it would never be the same. The world shifted again, and I found myself standing in a realm that seemed timeless, where past, present, and future intertwined. Around me, threads of light stretched in all directions, connecting events and people in ways I could never have imagined. Each thread pulsed with energy, carrying something powerful and eternal. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jesus stood beside me, his presence steady and filled with compassion. "This is the ripple effect of prayer," he said. "Every prayer you've ever spoken in faith has a lasting impact, far beyond what you can see." He gestured, and the threads began to glow brighter, illuminating moments from my life and beyond. I saw my grandmother, a woman of unshakable faith, kneeling beside her bed, hands clasped tightly in prayer. She prayed for her children, her grandchildren, and even her great-grandchildren, generations she would never meet. Her voice was steady, but filled with emotion as she spoke blessings, protection, and hope over our family. The scene shifted to my childhood. I saw myself as a little girl playing in the backyard while my grandmother prayed inside. The words of her prayers became beams of light that wrapped around me, shielding me from dangers I had never known existed. Her prayers didn't stop there. They extended through time, forming a protective canopy over my entire life. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with love. "Do you see, Sarah? Her prayers didn't end when she spoke them. They continue to work, even now." Tears filled my eyes as I realized how deeply her faith had shaped my life. The sacrifices she made, the hours she spent in prayer, they had laid the foundation for the protection and blessings I had experienced. But it wasn't just her. I saw my mother, too, praying for me during my teenage years when I had drifted from faith. Her prayers had been fervent and desperate, asking God to guide me back to Him. Those prayers had created a shield around me, preventing darkness from taking hold of my life, even when I felt lost. As I watched, Jesus showed me the moment I returned to church in my early 20s. I had thought it was a personal decision, something I had done on my own. But now I saw the truth. It had been the result of years of prayer. My mother's prayers, combined with my grandmother's, had created a spiritual ripple that gently guided me back to where I needed to be. "This is the power of generational prayer," Jesus said. "When families pray, their prayers don't just affect the present. They create a legacy that reaches into the future." The threads of light began to weave together, forming a tapestry that stretched far beyond my life. Jesus gestured toward another scene, and I saw myself praying for one of my young patients at the hospital. It was a day I remembered vividly. A little boy named Caleb had been struggling with a critical illness, and I had prayed for his healing while sitting quietly by his bedside. At the time, I had felt helpless, unsure if my words would even make a difference. In the spiritual realm, I saw how that prayer became a burst of light that traveled through time and space. It didn't just touch Caleb, it reached his parents, bringing them a sense of peace they hadn't felt in months. The prayer's ripple continued, extending to the doctors and nurses who cared for him. One of the doctors, a man I barely knew, felt compelled to pray for the first time in years after witnessing Caleb's remarkable resilience. "Your prayer for Caleb didn't stop with him," Jesus explained. "It became a chain reaction, touching lives you didn't even know." My heart swelled as I saw how far-reaching even a single prayer could be. But Jesus wasn't finished. He showed me moments when my prayers had intersected with those of others, combining to create something even greater. One scene showed a church prayer group interceding for a struggling community. I saw how their prayers connected with mine and others around the world, forming a vast network of light that pushed back against the darkness. "This is why unity in prayer is so important," Jesus said. "When my children pray together, their combined faith becomes a force the enemy cannot withstand." The vision shifted, and I saw another powerful truth. Prayers weren't bound by time. Jesus showed me how prayers spoken decades ago were still active, still influencing the present. I saw one of my grandmother's prayers from 40 years earlier, asking God to protect and guide her descendants. That prayer had directly impacted my life, shaping the choices I made and the protection I received. It was as though her words had been carried forward through time, continually renewing their power. But then, Jesus showed me something that brought me to tears. I saw moments when I had felt prompted to pray but ignored the nudge, dismissing it as insignificant or unnecessary. These missed prayers left gaps in the tapestry of light, areas where the darkness had been allowed to grow unchecked. "The enemy fears the prayers you haven't prayed yet," Jesus said gently. "But even in those moments, I wait for you. My love is constant, and my invitation is always open." His words filled me with both conviction and hope. I saw how even short, simple prayers spoken in faith could close those gaps, creating ripples that would spread far beyond what I could see. The vision shifted once more, and I saw something that left me in awe. A family gathered around their dining table, holding hands in prayer. Their words of gratitude and protection created a powerful shield that surrounded their home, one that the enemy couldn't penetrate. The scene expanded, and I saw communities praying together in unity, churches, schools, and even small groups of friends. Each prayer added strength to the spiritual fortresses protecting those communities. "This is why the enemy works so hard to stop prayer," Jesus said. "He knows that when my children come together, their prayers create strongholds of light that he cannot overcome." As the vision began to fade, I stood there in silence, overwhelmed by what I had witnessed. I had never understood the full impact of prayer before, but now it was clear. Every prayer, no matter how small, had eternal consequences. It wasn't just a conversation with God. It was a weapon, a shield, and a legacy that stretched across time and space. Jesus turned to me, his expression filled with love and purpose. "Sarah, this is the truth about prayer. It is not bound by time, nor limited by what you can see. It is a force that changes lives, destroys darkness, and builds my kingdom. Now that you know, will you share this truth with others?" I nodded, my heart full of gratitude and determination. I knew that what I had seen would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone I would share it with. Prayer wasn't just an act of faith. It was a legacy, a ripple that could reach farther than I could ever imagine. As the vision faded, I found myself standing once again in the radiant light of Jesus' presence. My heart was heavy with the weight of everything I had seen, but it was a good kind of weight, a calling, a purpose. I looked at him, my voice trembling as I spoke. Lord, I don't understand why you chose to show me all of this, but I am so grateful. What do you want me to do? Jesus stepped closer, his gaze filled with love and urgency. Sarah, he said, his voice both tender and commanding, you have been shown the truth so that you may share it. My children do not understand the power of prayer. Many have been deceived into thinking their prayers are weak or meaningless. But now you know the truth. Every prayer matters. Every prayer changes the spiritual realm. You must tell them. His words settled deep within me, igniting a fire I hadn't felt before. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I will, Lord. I'll tell them. I'll tell everyone. He smiled, his love surrounding me like a warm embrace. Go back, Sarah, and do not be afraid. You are never alone. Remember, it is not the eloquence of your prayers that moves heaven, but your faith and trust in me. Speak boldly, for I am with you. As his presence began to fade, his final words resonated in my soul. Tell them, Sarah. Tell them the truth about prayer. I closed my eyes, and with his love still surrounding me, I felt myself being drawn back toward the world I had left behind, my heart forever changed. I opened my eyes to the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The beeping of monitors and the hurried voices of nurses surrounded me, but my mind was still fixed on what I had just experienced. My body felt weak, but my spirit was stronger than it had ever been. I had been given a second chance, and I knew it wasn't by accident. Doctors and nurses called my recovery a miracle. I later learned I had been clinically dead for 27 minutes. They had been preparing to call my time of death when my heart suddenly started beating again. What shocked them even more was that there were no signs of lasting damage, no brain injury, no physical impairments. It was as though nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. Everything had happened. As I lay in that hospital bed, the memory of Jesus' words rang in my mind. Tell them the truth about prayer. I knew my life could no longer remain the same. This wasn't just an experience to be cherished. It was a call to action, a mission to share the incredible power of prayer with anyone who would listen. 2 weeks later, I returned home and began sharing my story. At first, it was just with friends and family, but soon, it extended to my community and beyond. Each time I spoke, I saw the same spark of hope and understanding light up in their eyes. My life had been transformed, and now I was determined to help others transform theirs. Looking back on everything that happened, I am overwhelmed with gratitude and purpose. My near-death experience was not just a miracle, it was a revelation. I saw the truth about prayer, something I had doubted for so long. Prayer is not just a spiritual discipline or a fleeting hope tossed into the air. It is a weapon, a shield, and a direct connection to the heart of God. Every prayer matters. Every word spoken in faith carries the weight of heaven and sends ripples through the spiritual realm. I now understand that even the smallest prayer, whispered in exhaustion or desperation, has the power to shatter darkness and invite light into the world. I've seen firsthand how prayers transcend time, impacting generations and creating legacies of faith. Today, my life is no longer the same. Prayer is no longer something I do out of obligation. It is my lifeline, my act of love and trust in the one who hears and responds. I pray for my family, my community, and even strangers, knowing that each word spoken in Jesus' name makes an eternal impact. As I share my story, I urge you to reclaim the power of prayer in your own life. Push past the doubts, the distractions, and the lies that tell you it doesn't matter. It does. I've seen the truth, and now I'm telling you, your prayers are powerful. They change lives. They change the world. And most of all, they draw you closer to God, who waits to hear your voice.